Okay, dokie. Hello, how's everybody doing? I'm doing great. It's great to see everybody. Um, or at least you get to hear my voice. I guess you don't get to see me at all. That's kind of depressing, but that's okay. That's okay because we're going to do some math here. We're going to try to solve for x with some trigonometric functions. So, without further ado, some of you might have these very similar to your homework problems or whatnot, and they can be a little tricky. We're going to start with two simpler ones. And then on another video, I'm going to go to doing some more complicated ones. But we're going to solve for all of the x values, all of the possible x values here. So that's important to know. Okay, and if you watch my other videos, solving for x means that we're solving for all the values. So without further ado, let's solve this. So how do you solve for a trig function? Well, the first thing is you have to realize that this trig function, once again, is a function itself. So we need to get the x in the function by itself. So we're going to do a little algebra. We're going to subtract 1 over here. We're going to then divide by 2. And then we have sine of x equals -1/2. That looks pretty good. Now, the next thing is you cannot divide by sine. If you divide by sine, that becomes a sin. So you do not want to divide by sine. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use a fundamental trig, or actually use the inverse. So we're going to take the inverse of both sides, okay? And when we do that, we're going to use the inverse properties. And the inverse sine or arc sine, they're one and the same. We have this right here. Okay, and so this inverse composed of its original function, they cancel out, turns into x. And now we're taking the inverse sine of -1/2. Okay, so now let's look at this. This is where we go to what we know about trig, and that's where I go right here. The inverse sine, okay, sine is negative here and here because sine y cosine x, sine y cosine x. And so, and because this is -1, this can be one of our fundamental ones. All right, we're going to use our, okay, these coterminal angles right here, a reference angle. All right, that's what we got right there. And so we're going to have -1 is opposite, 2 is hypotenuse, -1 and 2. And so first off, our first angle is going to be right there, starting at 0 going around. Okay, and we're going to say that x is going to be, well, what type of angle is that? Well, an angle opposite of -1 is actually a 30-degree angle. 30 degrees, that's a reference angle. Or we could say that in radians is going to be pi over 6. Pi over 6. Well, pi over 6 is in the first quadrant, so actually this is in the third quadrant. So this actually is going to be 7 pi over 6. And then our other one, all right, is going to be all the way around, whoop, right there. Well, that's going to be 9 pi over 6. All right, wait, no, not 9, maybe 11 pi over 6. I'm sorry, 11 pi over 6. And so we're going to also have 11 pi over 6. And now, since we're trying to find all of the x values, what we're going to do is we're going to add, well, how do we go around here? Well, we're going to go and add a 100 and, all right, 2 pi. Okay, so we're going to find all the coterminal values. So we're going to say 2 pi n, right? 2 pi n. And for the same one, we're going to go over here. We're going to say 2 pi n. N is any integer. And so what's going to happen here is that any value go here is just going to keep on going around, and around, and hits every single one of the values that we know. All right, that's that one. That's not too bad. All right, pretty basic, pretty simple. Whenever you're trying to find, just remember to put in the coterminal values when you're solving that. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Let's try this. Here's another one. All right, there's this tangent. So we're going to go through the same process. We're going to solve for x. All right, so for all the values. So to do that, we're going to go and subtract the square root of 3 to both sides, and then we have tangent of x. We can't divide by tan. That would be bad, but we're going to use the inverse tangent. So if we take the inverse tangent of both sides, we use the inverse property of functions, which states that a function composed of its original, all right, equals the value inside, and so we have the inverse tangent of negative square root of 3. Now, once again, if you put this in your calculator, your calculator will give you a value, all right, and tangent is going to be in the first or fourth quadrant. Okay, and so it's sometimes better when you have these just to kind of think about it. Well, when is tangent negative? Well, tangent is negative here, all right, in the fourth quadrant, and also here in the second quadrant. Because remember, tangent is y over x, and here is a positive x, here is negative y, and here is negative x over here. Okay, so we have a second quadrant angle and then a fourth quadrant angle that we need to find. Okay, there's two different ones. So right here, because it's square root of 3, and you know this is over 1, this is one of the basic trig functions. So if we do a little triangle, this is how I do it. Think about it. All right. Opposite is going to be, well, square root of 3. Well, that's actually going to be positive square root of 3. And it's going to be negative 1. And that's going to be 1 radical 3 into 2. Okay, over here, same thing. Well, this is going to be negative square root of 3. This is positive 1. Once again, that ratio becomes negative. That's why we can do this. And 2. All right, so, excuse me. What angle is opposite square root of 3? Well, we know that angle right there is going to be a 60-degree angle for a reference angle, or we know it's going to be pi over 3. Well, that's only in the first quadrant. And so what is that value in the second quadrant? Well, that is going to equal 2 pi over 3. Right? And if we go all the way down to the fourth quadrant, we know that's going to equal, you guessed it, 5 pi over 3. Okay, 5 pi over 3. When you put this in your calculator, knowing that you'll get a negative, all right, 60 degrees, negative 60 degrees divided in degrees, or negative pi over 3, because that's one thing you should know, or you probably talked about in your previous chapters. Now, once again, we're trying to find all x values for this function. And so we're going to be adding all and subtracting all the coterminal values. So we're going to add a 2 pi, 360 n. So it just keeps on going around in a circle. N is any positive or negative integer. And then we have right here the same thing, 2 pi n as well. That's what we got. And those are our answers. Yeah. Once again, basic trigonometric functions, easy to solve, nothing really complex here when we're solving it. But when we're solving for all of them, make sure you add your coterminal values there so you can plug them in and find out all the possible values for x. All right. I hope that helps out. Good luck and God bless in the rest of your problems.